All right, welcome to the Great Trials podcast. This is Steve Lowry with Yvonne Godfrey, and maybe a little bit of input from Raz Misher. So, Yvonne, how are you doing today? And this is a different show, so you want to tell everybody what we're doing?
This is a different show. Yeah, we're actually really excited about this. You know, a lot of times it can feel like, we hope we're putting some content out there that's useful, and our guests are very generous to share their knowledge with everyone. But we want to make the podcast as useful to people as possible, lawyers and non-lawyers alike. So we want to encourage people to send their questions in. A lot of other podcasts you might listen to do that. And we want to do that too. If you've got a question about a case we talked about, or a question about something in general, a question about something you wish we'd talk more about, please let us know. Find us out at the Great Trials Podcast on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. You can send us an email at
info@greattrialspodcast.com. I got the information.
Thank you, Steve.
Info, INFO. And our handle is at Great Trials Podcast, which, if you're good with Instagram and Facebook, I think that's how you find us.
Yes. You can find us that way, and just send us a direct message on there. And just ask us. It'll be easier for us to keep track of them that way than comments. But and just ask us any questions that you're thinking of. We'd really love to have some questions to answer and mix those into some of our episodes.
And I think we'll do it. We'll try not only, for us to give our answers depending on what the question is, but also ask our guests and get some input from them and see what they say. So it should be fun. So we hope people have questions, and we hope you send them in, and we'll do our best to get them answered.
Yeah, absolutely. We want this to be interactive. We want you to know that we do care we do care what you think about the episodes. We do care about making them useful. We do, and not just because of the reviews.
although we should remind everybody, if you can rate and review us, go on and rate and review us. Give us good ones though, please.
Rate, review, subscribe.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I keep waiting for. I'm not going to get this IKEA money, people. I'm not going to get these big podcast ad money without you reviewing and subscribing. But no, and Steve and I know that a lot of times we ask the questions that we are thinking of, or we ask a lot of listeners the same questions to hear different perspectives on it. But you might be listening and thinking like, why don't they ever ask, whatever. Yes. So, let us know, and we'll ask. But so Steve, so what are we going to do today?
I think what we're doing today is we're doing I don't know if it's a mini interview or an interview of each other. Just sort of like, our deepest, darkest secrets is what's going to come out. So I think, yeah. Right? I mean, is that the idea?
Yeah. I think we're really going to go like just blow past like any sort of the professional or like personal boundaries, and just go right for like the deepest, darkest trauma, blackmail material, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And let's just put it out there.
Yeah. So speaking of deep, dark trauma, before we dig into that, we do want to ask Raz about he just took the LSAT, and we talked about in one of our last episodes, one of our most recent episodes, about how he was doing that from home during COVID time. So he had to be in a room that he took them around and showed them, and he was taking it at like 8:00 at night. So Raz, tell us how it went. I was very worried you were going to have technical issues somehow. Tell us everything.
And what time did you go to bed?
Actually, like 4 a.m. because I drove to another part of the state and got drunk with a friend after.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what you have to do. That's right. You cannot just go to sleep after taking the LSAT.
No, I was too hyped.
Yeah,
exactly. But it wasn't that bad. It was weird because of the technical aspect of it. And at first, my speaker didn't work, so they had to send me to another tech person to help me get through that.
Oh my God.
But I figured it out before they sent me to him.
Yeah, so, of course. You're a producer.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on now.
Yeah, but yeah, so you had to show them the room. You had to show them both your ears. You can only use like these type of earplugs if you want to use an earplug, nothing wired or corded. You have to show them your hands and your forearms. do a 360 of the room. I have a second monitor in here. I had to take the monitor out. I have to use show them that I turned my phone off and put it in a place where they can see it. So it's show them under the table, the tabletop, the door, everything.
And somebody's watching you the whole time.
I'm pretty sure it's one person that's watching maybe 5 to 10 people at once. That's what I'm guessing.
And this footage is going to be put on some bizarre website out there, just like
Right,
watching students take the LSAT.
Right, showing me picking my nose because I forgot.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my God. So then for the like multiple choice questions and stuff, I guess maybe they're all like that. Are you doing those on the computer? Like, is there like a test booklet you get, or it's just all on the screen?
Oh yes, it's all on the screen, but you do have scratch paper. So you have five sheets of blank paper, computer paper. You have to show them each side of the paper before the test.
Yeah.
At the end of the test, you have to like tear it up so they see you destroy it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
see, I would really struggle with not being able to like mark out the answers I had ruled out, or like like for the things that I can't remember what the sections are called, but all the reading and stuff that you can't like
reading comp,
right.
That you can't like mark up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So luckily, like on the LSAC website, they have a ton of practice tests, and you can practice all your highlighting and underlining and marking out. So I was pretty used to that, actually doing it virtual.
Got it. Doing that on the screen.
Yeah, doing it on the screen. So they have like 5 different highlight colors you can use. You can X out a question if you think the answer is wrong, all this stuff.
Yeah.
Underline, highlight, erase. But Steve, you said last time that you enjoy just using a paper and pencil.
Right.
And I do too, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
It does feel weird on screen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's hard. Like, even if it's just a Scantron, just having it there. That would be tough. I mean, I do think, look, obviously that's the way things are going to continue to move. So if you can make that switch to learning that way and reading that way and working all based on screens, that's obviously the way things are going to be done more and more. But man, I would struggle with that for sure.
I do have a horror story of a friend who was trying to take the bar virtually last week, and his microphone broke.
Oh no.
And they had to cancel the entire test because he couldn't add another microphone at the last minute, and he couldn't fix the one he had. So he has to wait until I think next year to take the bar.
That is a nightmare, because you work so hard to get ready for the bar, and you're ready to take it then. And then at that point, you just want to get it over with. And then to know that you got to wait months. Oh my God.
I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, there's 2 administrations a year. And if you are looking for a job where you have to be a licensed lawyer, that's 6 more months that you can't work as a licensed lawyer.
Family to support, all that stuff,
Yeah.
Oh, that is a nightmare. My palms are sweating.
I wanted to cry for him. It was
Oh, that's awful. That's awful.
And the thing is, stuff like that happens. I mean, any lawyer who uses technology has been in the courtroom when at some point something doesn't go right, unless Legal Technology Services is working for you, which one of our sponsors.
Right.
But
in which case their computers always work, but one time their entire table collapsed under the weight of the computer.
Yeah, that's right.
That was one of my favorite moments.
But I mean, so stuff like that just happens, and then to know that it's going to cost you 6 months of prep time, and it's
which wouldn't have happened if it wasn't virtual. If it was in person, it wouldn't have been an issue.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Dude.
Well, so in Raz, you've promised us that you're not going to look at your results. You're just going to do this live on air, right? And you're going to open up and tell everybody.
Oh my God.
Right?
No.
Right.
No way. Oh my God.
I already signed up to take a second in October. I think I did decent, but I feel like I could do better.
Yeah, I feel like you can always do better. I did significantly better the second time. I think there's something about just getting that first one out of the way in that formal test environment.
I did not do it a second time, and I'm not saying it's because I did great the first time. I don't know. I think I did good enough, and I just didn't want to do it again.
Yeah, I did not want to do it again. And part of the reason that I did was because I had taken it decided to start working right after college, decided to start working instead. I didn't do that great. Decided to start working instead. So my test score was already old. And so decided to do a little more prep. I hadn't done any prep the first time, decided to actually take it seriously and do it again the second time. And it's one of those things I'm really glad I did. There are other standardized tests that I only took once. Like I think ACT and SAT, I both just took once. I wish I would have taken those again, seeing what happened with my LSAT score. I think I would have improved if I had done it again. So anyway.
Can I ask you guys the first question?
Yeah.
No. Yes.
So this is something similar to what I usually used to ask all my guests on my radio show in Savannah. But what is your superpower? What is something you do better than anybody else? And that's it for me.
Man. Well, you want to go first, Yvonne? Or?
No, I want you to go first. Unless you don't know what your answer is.
I think I know what my answer is, and I really don't want to make this sound like I think I'm just great, but and Yvonne has seen this. I think I really am good at cross-examining people, and I think I'm good at pinning them down, and sometimes I can be not the easiest guy to get along with once you're under the heat of the questioning, but that's what, as far as, I mean, and I enjoy every part of trying a case, and that, you know, and I take all of them very seriously, and I think that that they're all important. I mean, voir dire, opening, closing are all extremely important, but the part that, and a lot of lawyers are like this, you know, when you get a good cross-examination going, there's nothing better in my mind.
That's a great answer. So I would say I wish my answer was different, because I think mine is probably my greatest strength and weakness, which is empathy. I think I'm a very empathetic person, and so that really serves me well when it comes to relating to our clients, relating to our coworkers, and getting along with people that I need to kind of win over a little bit, you know, like treating physicians or witnesses or people who don't necessarily want to deal with your case, you know, kind of winning those people over. Yeah. But the flip side is, during Steve's cross-examination moments, for example, it's torture.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure I've mentioned it on the show before, but I get like awkward when I watch The Office. I get uncomfortable with fake awkward moments, let alone real confrontation. So I still think, I think that's probably my superpower, but it's a little too overpowered. I wish I could take it down a notch.
You know, one thing I will say, and I'm not trying to make this like all the things we do great. I mean, I feel like, you know, we work hard, but I think listening is an underestimated power for lawyers. It is, you know, it's always good to be able to talk, but to really listen to what people say, and then to, you know, be able to change, you know, where you're going with either your questions or your argument or whatever, based on what people say. So I've always taken great pride in taking the time to listen and listen as best I can to what, you know, the witness is saying, or what another lawyer is saying, or obviously what the judge is saying, but just listening closely, and then knowing how that's affecting either your argument or your questioning, things like that. So I think listening is also a extremely important thing that I try to do well.
Yeah, I feel like you do that really well. You remember what people say. You sort of, I mean, almost to the point that I think this is why your cross-examination can be really tough, is because you will really latch on to, you know, you'll pick up the specific word choice that somebody's used and really hone in on that. And I think you're right. I think that's one of the mistakes that I have made, for sure, in especially at early depositions, is if you're thinking too much about what you need to ask, or your checklist of things you want to ask, or your outline, which I don't necessarily recommend having a detailed one, but, you know, if you're thinking about that, if you're thinking about yourself and, you know, can other people tell I'm a newbie, or was that a stupid question, or whatever, then you're not listening to what the witness is saying and adapting to what the witness is saying. And I think that's hard to get a hold of. I mean, to get the hang of.
Well, it is, because you're in a high stress situation. You're, you know, most likely nervous. All of us get nervous, but being able to do that is important. And we've all seen lawyers who come in with their checklist, and they're just going down the checklist. And you can even tell, like, when the witness says something, you're like, well, that's really interesting. And then they just keep going down their checklist. You're like, well, they're not listening to what the witness is saying.
Yeah.
And it comes off so badly, and you miss really big points. So, I guess that's one thing I'm, as far as a tip, listen really well.
One of the things I would love to hear what our listeners think about, if they could either work this into a question or send us a message about is, I've talked to a lot of different lawyers since I started practicing about what they do in depositions. And because I always feel I could get better at them. And I do struggle, I think, with either listening to what the witness is saying and then leaving and thinking of something I didn't ask, or, sticking with my outline too much and then being like, what did they say about this? Did I ask this? But I'm really, so one of the pieces of advice that I had gotten from somebody was, it was somebody who loves the live transcript system. I can't remember what it's called, but
now that
there's a name for it.
Yeah. And you can get it from any court reporter. They'll put you up a little screen and you'll just see the transcript going by.
Yeah, it's like a little iPad. And so it's running. And now, so I'm a very visual learner. So I could see that helping me pick up more on what the witness is saying, right? Because I'm reading my question as it's being displayed and reading what they're saying. It's kind of like it's a live transcript, sort of like closed captions on TV. But then I'm like, or would I just be super distracted? Like when you do watch closed captions on like a live TV show and you end up, and they're behind what's on the screen. And so then you end up like only reading the captions or only watching the screen and not doing both. I'm really interested in what our listeners, our lawyer listeners think about that. And have you ever tried it, Steve?
Yeah, I've definitely used it, especially in two occasions. I find it to be really helpful. One is if you've got a really complex, long deposition and you're going to need to go back through and figure out what they said. And then the other is where you're doing a deposition through a translator. We've taken several depositions in various countries, and especially in my experience, when you're deposing somebody who speaks Japanese, for instance. Whatever you say, it can sound like it can take a long time to translate what you say, and then they answer back, and then it's and then you finally get the answer back, and sometimes you're kind of like, well, what was my point with that question?
Yeah, where was I going?
So I actually find it whenever depositions are being translated, I find that very helpful. That way I can always kind of keep track, like, oh yeah, this is what I was asking. And then anytime you've got something that's going to be like a complex or just a long deposition, and you might need to bring stuff back up, those two occasions, I think it works really well. There are some lawyers who use it for every single deposition they take, and I think it's probably not a bad practice. I just haven't found that I felt like I've needed to use it for every deposition, but I have used it on certain ones.
Yeah. I don't think I've found the perfect system yet. Like if you have a witness that you just have to cover certain documents with, then that can provide some structure, right? But then sometimes it's like, okay, do I just want to have a notes on my computer where I'm sort of typing as I go along because I can type really quickly and sort of keep my own, quasi running transcript and my outline is there. But then I'm sort of like, oh, I really hate being too attached to the computer.
Yeah.
And then I don't know. I usually end up doing a mix. And so then I've got some stuff on my computer, some stuff in like a quick, like sort of bullet list of things I want to cover, and some documents somewhere else. And I'm pretty disorganized the whole time.
Well, and it's funny, I spend a lot of time on outlines. Like I will do pretty detailed outlines, like especially if I want to make sure I remember documents and quotes from documents and things like that. But then during a deposition or a cross-examination, I rarely use the outline, except I might go back through it on a break or something. But because I found that in just the practice and effort of putting together the outline really makes, at least for me, learn the information really well.
Yes.
And after I've done that, then it's like I don't need the outline anymore. But
Agree.
if I hadn't done the outline, I wouldn't know it as well as I do.
Agree. It's the process of making it.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, here's something I'm curious about for you, because I I was doing this recently where, newer case, newer clients, case is still under investigation. And, there's all this stuff that you've got to cover with clients especially when you're signing them up, or they're retaining you and you're still looking into their case, right? There's some that they come in and you don't know if you're going to be able to file. You need more information. You might need an expert's evaluation, whatever. And I feel like I feel like there's so much you have to do in some of those initial conversations, right? You've got to manage those expectations. And then you've also got to make sure you cover the stuff with the clients that you forget some people don't know, covering preserving confidentiality, covering, what's a good idea and a bad idea as far as social media goes. And I feel like I always just struggle with that. I don't struggle with that balance, but that can be just such a beast of a meeting, I guess.
You're talking about like the first or second or one of the initial sort of meetings with your client to kind of learn the story, learn the case, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Like maybe you've had a call with one of the family members to get some initial information before you decide, before both sides decide that this is a relationship that you want to, sign an agreement and investigate, further. And I'm just like, I guess my question is kind of all over the place, but in your experience, what do you feel like are the keys to coming? You also don't want to discourage somebody, right? They've gone through this horrible loss, usually either of a loved one or their own injury or something. So you don't want to be discouraging. You don't want to be negative, but I also feel like there's so many do's and don'ts you have to cover.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm just kind of wondering how you approach those meetings so that they don't seem. I just had one where I felt like I was very lectury.
Yeah. And I understand that. I guess I try to approach those meetings where I just really want to get to know the client and I want to get to know their story. So, I'll definitely go through sort of the facts of what happened to them and their background and stuff like that. But as far as really detailed questions, we have a questionnaire that we're going to have our clients fill out, which our paralegals do. So I leave that to them. And then as far as making sure that we get really, really, all this sort of technical detailed information, I'll get some of that, but a lot of that I'll leave to either the paralegal or associate who's going to follow up with, like a specific sort of like a checklist. Because really what I want to do is just kind of hear their story, hear, what they're saying, and just have a conversation with them and try to listen as best I can to what's going on with them. And then as far as stuff that we can follow up on, we do that. Now, in cases where, something bad has happened to someone and either there's not going to be anybody who you can bring suit against, or that, maybe the damages aren't enough. Those are tough situations. And I try to be as straightforward with them with the clients as I can, and just explain to them that, I understand that whatever reason they're coming into your office is one of the worst things that's ever happened to them. Even though if you compare one client to the other, one client may be a lot better off than the other.
Sure.
But to that person, whatever they're in your office for, that's the worst thing that's happened to them. And so I always try to understand that the reason they're there is because they feel like something really bad has happened to either them or a loved one, and that they want somebody to listen to them and they want somebody to, explain to them, what their options are. So I try to do that. And then I try to just be straightforward and say, unfortunately, for these reasons, it's not a case that our firm could pursue. If I think that somebody else might be able to pursue it, then I'll give them some other lawyers' names. If I think that they're just not going to win at all, they just don't have a legal claim, then I'll do my best to explain that to them and just explain that, it's a terrible, tragic situation, but, under the law, here's how the law works, and you're not going to be able to recover on a claim for that. So just try to, I don't know, I guess I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I think I try to do my best, just one, getting to know the client, hearing their story, and just, and there's a classic mistake is leaving my phone on. So it rings in the middle of a podcast.
I couldn't really hear it.
No, you couldn't. Okay.
Mm-mm.
I'm going to put it on silent. This is what gets judges yelling at you during the middle of a hearing is
Yeah.
when you leave your phone on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically just trying to really, understand, listen to them. I mean, as you were saying before, empathize with them, just kind of understand what they're going through and then, obviously try and figure out, do they have a case? Who do they have it against? Is there a realistic, ability to recover in the case? Because the last thing anybody wants, especially when they've been through a tragic situation, is then to get involved in a process that could take 2, 3, 4 years and then get nothing at the end of it. I mean, that only puts salt in the wound. So
Right.
If you think that's going to happen, it's better to tell them early on and and hopefully, and I'll be honest, I mean, not everybody likes to hear that. So sometimes, you'll get a not so great reaction, but generally most people are pretty open to listening and hearing what you have to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to do it. I mean, I think that's good advice because I think it's nice when you can divide. There's so much work that comes on with a client whose case you want to investigate and hopefully file. But there's so much work that goes on in the beginning, not just the investigation, all the stuff we've talked about to so many of our guests about in terms of the importance of acting quickly if there's maybe video out there, the importance of, record preservation and all that kind of thing. And then so you've got all
and
that
social media stuff. Yeah, that's stuff I always, have to remember about
is stuff going to disappear from the manufacturer's website or, whatever. So there's all that stuff. Then there's, the stuff that's sort of like getting to know the clients, getting to know their story, getting to know what information they have, preserving your own evidence that you might have. Then there's the conversations that you need to have with them that just, to manage their expectations and let them know what to expect. And then there's all the other stuff that, as a firm sort of best practices stuff that you want to cross off, whether it's, getting your paperwork together, if you need HIPAA authorizations or whatever. And, talking to them about just talking to your clients about general stuff like social media and who to talk to the case about, who you can talk to the case about, who you can talk to about the case and who you can't.
Yeah.
But I do think it makes sense. It's nice when you can split that up, right? When you have some experienced paralegals who can go through a lot of the list, take care of a lot of that so that you can kind of focus on getting a relationship with the clients. Cause that can go a long way when you have that trust and they have that confidence in you.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say for any lawyers listening, especially ones who are maybe opening up their own practice or starting out, I mean, hiring good staff and taking care of them is it's the most important thing you can do. A good paralegal or a great paralegal, like we have some fantastic paralegals at our firm. I mean, they are worth their weight in gold, and they're can help you so much, not only with, making sure you've got everything you need for a case, but, helping with clients, I guess one thing I would say is don't skimp on hiring a paralegal or a legal assistant who, isn't qualified or doesn't seem interested. I mean, it's okay to hire people who are less experienced. Just take the time to train them and take the time to get them involved, because we have some fantastic paralegals who, when they first came to the firm, didn't really know all that much, but dove in and worked hard and learned. So, I mean, I'm not saying don't hire somebody who is inexperienced, because some of them can become your best paralegals, but just take the time to hire good paralegals, hire good staff, and to really help them understand what you're trying to accomplish for the clients, and help them understand your clients and how important it is to them. And they're I feel like we're blessed to have really, really good staff, and they're so important to us.
Agree. And I think, back to the empathy thing, sort of figure out the best way to communicate your appreciation for them, and then make sure you do it, because I think there's a lot of attorneys, men and women, probably, I think more men, who were like, well, if I'm not yelling at you, then you're doing a good job. Right. And it's like, well, it's nice to hear that you're doing a good job, or to do certain things to show someone that you appreciate the work that they're doing, because it can get really hard, when a client is upset about something and they can't get a hold of you as the lawyer. They're going at your staff, they're going at your receptionist, they're going at your paralegal. And which is not to say you have angry clients calling all the time, but like you said, most of these people are dealing with us because they're going through something terrible. So emotions are high. They're trying to navigate a new process, and then that's on top of just the sneaky marketing calls you get, and just all that other stuff that's trying to get through your process to get to the lawyer. But they do, staff is so important. And when shortly after I got hired, our team needed a paralegal as well. It was when our firm had kind of shifted to more of teams instead of different people working on different cases. And so shortly after I was hired, we also needed a paralegal, and I had been at the firm for like a month. And I remember Jeff basically telling me that something about how it was way harder to find a good paralegal than it was to find a good associate. Just that associates were like a dime a dozen, basically, which I thought was pretty rude considering I'd just been hired.
After all we said about how you treat your staff, I mean, that's a great manager. No,
a little rude.
Right.
But I guess it all worked out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Yvonne, are we? I was going to interview you a little bit about your background. Is that the plan for this?
I don't know. I wasn't sure if we were supposed to focus on like questions that we'd ask each other about, like practicing, or I don't know. Well, what were you going to ask me?
I was going to, first of all, I was going to, I don't think we've ever, I don't think I've ever introduced you like the way we do a lawyer and kind of talk about all of your accomplishments and things like that.
Please don't do that.
You definitely have great accomplishments. I want everybody to know.
I just broke out into a sweat.
I mean, Yvonne has been named as an on the rise attorney by the Daily Report in 2020. She's been a Super Lawyers Rising Star multiple times. She won the Generation Next Award, and is on the GTLA, the Georgia Trial Lawyers Executive Committee. She was a cum laude graduate from UGA Law and went to Rhodes College, also cum laude, was on the Georgia Law Review. It's just an all-around fantastic lawyer. And I will tell you something interesting, because I was thinking about how would I want to do this. And so I decided to just type in the name Yvonne Godfrey and just see what the autofill did.
Okay.
And so I could just learn. And did you know that Yvonne Godfrey is a character on General Hospital?
No.
And people were asking whether or not Yvonne Godfrey was killed off of General Hospital. and then another one is called The World's Strictest Parents. It's Yvonne Godfrey, World's Strictest Parents. And apparently you, Yvonne, were the host of a talk show in Australia called World's Strictest Parents about parenting.
I'm very familiar with Australian Yvonne Godfrey. Okay. She writes books on parenting, and is really ruining my my Google results. My SEO is she is really messing with it. She's, I guess, the more famous Yvonne Godfrey in terms of real people. I did not know there was a fictional Yvonne Godfrey, but Australian Yvonne Godfrey is kind of ruining my game a little bit. What were you going to say, Raz?
If you have kids, you should buy like all her books and put them in your library.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And tell your kids you wrote the book on parenting.
Like,
you can't get over on me.
Let me look up what I wrote.
Let me see. Who's the expert on this? Me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so Yvonne, I was going to ask you, because I at least when we kind of had this idea, we were going to, get like where we came from kind of thing. But How did you, I guess, decide you wanted to be a lawyer or were interested in the law?
I lucked into it. I totally lucked into it. My parents found this book that I wrote, like one of those things you fill out like in elementary school, like a form where you're like coloring and stuff. And one of the things was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wrote that I wanted to be a judge, and drew a picture of myself with a gavel, like behind a podium. I don't remember doing that. I don't remember wanting to be a judge or a lawyer growing up. I just didn't know what I wanted to do at all. Through college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew what I liked doing, and I liked reading and researching and writing. And then I just lucked out with my first job after college. My first serious job was at Motley Rice, working for lawyers.
Right.
And so
a very well-known law firm out of Charleston, South Carolina, that does cases nationally. I mean,
yeah.
Ron Motley and Joe Rice are sort of, well, Ron is passed away now, but we're sort of legends.
Yes. And Ann Ritter, who was basically their right-hand woman. And she really took a chance on me. She was managing member there at that time. And she really totally took a chance on me, like somebody with no experience in that field at all, who would have to learn everything. But that was it. I think I more decided to go to law school and stuff because I thought it was something that I would be good at and like doing, and then, so it wasn't, I feel like I wasn't, I don't have a cool story about it, about being driven. I didn't have any lawyers in the family. I didn't really know what it was going to involve. But I feel like I got lucky, I sort of just went with my strengths, and I lucked out, I think, finding a place that I really like working, and work that I really feel lucky to be doing. What about you, Steve?
So yeah, it's interesting for me because I think, when I was a little kid, I don't think a lawyer was something I thought about. There's nobody in my family who was a lawyer, and the one thing that I remember, and this might shock you, Yvonne, but I was pretty good at arguing even as a small child. And so all growing up, all my teachers were always like, oh, you're going to be a lawyer someday. And then when they would do like debate and stuff like that, they're like, oh yeah, Steve, put Steve on that. He's going to be a lawyer someday. So I kind of always heard it like, he's going to be a lawyer. And then, when I was in college, I got a job working for the Maryland Attorney General's office, and they were sort of doing investigations. We were in the higher education division, and they were doing investigations on like a lot of investigations on fraud and colleges that are sort of like not really colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember they were pursuing a case against this guy who had set up this trucking school, and then, gotten a bunch of money in, and then he bankrupted that company, and then he opened up a brand new trucking school at the same place with the same assets, and then took a bunch of money in there, then bankrupted. That was sort of like his MO. So they got into this whole thing. It's where I first learned about piercing the corporate veil and all that kind of stuff. And I remember they needed to serve the owner of the trucking company with a subpoena, and I don't know why, instead of, sending some investigator out to do it, they're like, Steve, you want to do this? And I'm like some college kid, and I was like, yeah, I want to go do this. And so I remember driving up in my little Honda Civic into this like trucking school, surrounded by like all these big truck drivers, and just asking for I was like, where I can find such and such, and so they all direct me to sort of this back office. And by the way, at this trucking school, it was a bunch of trucks and pickup trucks, but then there was a Ferrari parked there. And so I was like, oh, I think I know who drives the Ferrari.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So anyway, so this guy comes out and he's all happy to meet me, and I'm like, here you are, you're being served, with this lawsuit. And then I had to walk back out, it passed all of these, big burly truck drivers and everything. But that just, that sort of, I knew at that point that I wanted to be involved in the law in some aspect. And then, and then of course I went to law school after that. And I wasn't actually sure that I wanted to do like, plaintiff's personal injury or represent injured people. In fact, I went to law school initially with the idea that I was going to work on, for public interest groups on the environment. And that's why I went to the law school I did out in Portland, Oregon. Lewis and Clark, great environmental law school. But one of the first jobs that I worked at after law school, this is even before I I think I had taken the bar, but I didn't know whether or not I had passed. This case came in with this little girl who had been laying on a mattress, and her brother was playing with a Scripto Tokai lighter, and he ended up igniting the mattress, and she got burned severely, 90% of her body. And so we had a case against Scripto Tokai and against the mattress manufacturer. I can't remember what it was, but it was the polyurethane foam in there that once a flame, once you sort of get through the top surface of polyurethane, it releases this gas that becomes like extremely flammable, and it goes up like a fireball. And I just remember this little girl and how sweet she was, even though she was severely deformed. But she was the sweetest little girl, and would come up and I would just talk to her, and I was the young associate, not even a real lawyer yet. And from that moment on, I was like, that's the kind of work I want to do. I want to work where I help people, and where I help people who've been injured like that.
Yeah.
So
wow. I think like we know we get to do that now, but I think now that we work with the clients that we do, but there is this point of time, especially if you go right through to law school, or if you don't have lawyers in the family, or you didn't work for a law firm, you might not know what you're in for good or bad, or what working in different types of law or in different sides of a case means for you. Like I think my exposure at Motley Rice, working there, a lot of what I was working on were cases that were for big groups of people, right? So it was some of it was medical articles type research for asbestos cases. Some of it was on pollution from chicken, poultry processing plants. Some of it was securities fraud related stuff. But so it was always usually, number one, I wasn't a lawyer or a paralegal, so I wasn't really meeting any clients. But when I was thinking about our clients, it was just this group of people. But the reason I knew I still wanted to do that after law school was because of the work that so many of our guests on the show do, that I hope that we do, which is to uncover something that you would think would be public, or you would think would be checked by the government or some sort of regulatory agency, or that corporate governance wouldn't allow. Those systems really aren't there. It's a very rude awakening if you were kind of naive about how you think that stuff works. And so that was what I really gravitated towards, was the hard work that trial lawyers in particular do to uncover dangerous information that exposes a ton of people. So it was kind of this macro level at first.
Yeah.
And then obviously it can become a lot more rewarding once you have these personal connections with individual clients. But that to me is the coolest thing about what we do. But like, the story I always tell is that right after I started at our firm, one of the very first things I did was jump onto a trial team the trial was set for like 3 months after I started. And it was a tire defect case. And what I was learning in just those first couple weeks, I was calling my parents, my grandma, asking them what kind of tires they had in their car, if it had been repaired, not to cheap out on tires, all this stuff that they're like, you have literally never cared about tires before. Where's this coming from? But it's the cool part about what we do, but man, then you see it everywhere,
Yeah.
you know?
No, it's the same thing, because we do a lot of auto defect work, and I remember when I first, started working on auto defect cases, and then, and I think I was driving my family and friends crazy about, because I'd start talking to them about what kind of car they drove, and I'm like, well, that car is, that's got this problem, and I don't know if I'd be driving that. You might want to think about something else. I think, some of them were receptive to it, but there were several that were like, yeah,
Yeah.
shut up, Steve.
Please stop.
Yeah, exactly.
So Steve, so speaking of, I mean, Great Trials podcast, what do you, if you had just had to think about it on the spot, what do you think is your greatest trial moment? Just like a moment in trial that you come back to that you're like, that was awesome. It doesn't have to be something you did, although I like, for me, it probably would be something I did. But
I can remember there are certain times when, and even the cases that I don't want to sit here and say that I've won every case. I haven't. I've definitely lost some, and even some of those cases that we've lost, I have just some great memories of the trial. I think, one time that I've always sort of enjoyed was a case that we tried with one of our guests on the show, Barry Eichen, up in New Jersey, and we had a very good judge, but she, I would say, was a difficult judge. Had made a lot of rulings against us, and I had screwed up. I've told this story before, I don't think on the podcast, but this is going to be a big trial. This woman, Rebecca Zachrocki, was driving a Ford Explorer, and she was driving on the Garden State Parkway. Her throttle gets stuck, and she has to kind of unstick it, and she loses control, and she rolls over the Explorer. And as she does, her arm goes out of the sunroof, and she gets a full brachial plexus injury. So she had basically a paralyzed arm. And we bring up 100 jurors. We do voir dire, and then I'm giving the opening. She had, right before, there had been a recall on this. There had been a recall on the throttle, and so we had put that into the opening, that we were going to get into the recall, the fact that Ford had recalled it, and and part of the claim was that the recall came like a month after the accident happened for Rebecca, but the judge, Ford, made a motion right before trial started that we couldn't mention recall in the opening. We thought we could. The judge said, no, you can't mention recall. And so, so I go back and I sit with our technology company, which was not Legal Technology Services. I'll just make that clear. It was a different company, and I'm not going to say who. And I told him, I said, take out these, 5 slides or whatever that mentioned recall. And so I'm giving the opening, and the opening is going great. I'm not kidding that there were like 2 or 3 jurors that were crying in the opening. We're feeling really good about it. And as I'm talking, I look back at the screen, and written as big as you can see across the screen is the word recall. And I'm like, move on, let's go to the next slide. And so I finished the opening, and as soon as I'm done, Ford's like, well, we need something. We have something to discuss with the court, Your Honor. And we're like, you ruled out mentioning recall, and right behind Mr. Lowry was a giant sign of recall. And so the judge declared a mistrial. And not only did she declare a mistrial, but if you can imagine that, we're in a courtroom full of New Jersey lawyers. We're in New Jersey, and I'm the only out-of-state lawyer. I'm a Georgia lawyer. So of course she thinks, she's like, first of all, I don't know why we needed some Georgia lawyer to come up here and help try this case in New Jersey. And then she, and then of course thinks that I just disregarded her ruling.
Right.
And so she was not happy with me, is what I'm trying to say. It was not a good way to start my relationship with this judge. So we ended up having to, we repicked a jury the very next day, gave the same opening, but the jury completely stone-faced me. So the difference between the 2 juries that I was giving the opening to was dramatic.
Right.
But so that's a long way of getting to what was my sort of my favorite part of the trial, was that the judge had ruled out all the other incidents of stuck throttles from getting to the jury. And they had put their corporate rep up, and during the direct examination of the corporate rep, the Ford lawyer made the, in my opinion, mistake of saying, he put up the technical service bulletin. And for anybody that doesn't know, the technical service bulletin is basically where Ford is telling its dealers what the problem is, how you fix it. And in this technical service bulletin, it talked about stuck throttles, and it talked about how it could be fixed, and it talked about how it just happened in some Explorers. And so he made a big point in asking the corporate representative of saying, see right there, it just says some Explorers, right? It's not all of them, kind of thing. So so I was like, well, I knew how many some was. So as soon as he sat down, I grabbed the document I was looking for, and I said, sir, will you just tell the jury how many Ford Explorers some was? And he, he's like having trouble reading the document. And I was like, it's right there, sir. Just read right there. And the number was 57,000. 57,000 Ford Explorers had stuck throttles. And I'm like, so some is 57,000. Well, I've never seen it so blatant on a jury's face where like their entire demeanor changed. I mean, it's like the curtain was just lifted back.
Yeah.
And now they were mad at Ford, and you can see it. And so, I mean, there's been a lot of really fun parts at trial, but that for me really was just like, when you see that happening, and, and you could just feel the whole courtroom change. Once that evidence came out, once the corporate representative had to admit that 57,000 Ford Explorers had a problem with throttles getting stuck. Yeah, I mean, I want to say the trial went on for quite some time, but it was over for Ford at that point.
Yeah.
But, so that is definitely up there as part of my favorites. And it was a good way to make up for the fact that I had mistried the case in the opening statement.
Yes. Yeah. That's awesome. That is a good story.
So Yvonne, how about, sorry for that long story, but I'd love to hear from you. What is, tell us one of your favorite or your most favorite trial moment.
So I think as I've said on the show, I think a lot before, a lot of my roles at trial. So I've been all the way through to verdict at trial, I think 5 or 6 times. And then there's a lot of other cases I've gotten ready, but have resolved right before. And in those cases, for the most part, I do a lot of the behind the scenes work. I'm doing a lot of the, working on the depositions, working on the PowerPoints, working on the charges, working on the motions in limine, all the pretrial stuff, wrangling witnesses. And I'm not doing a lot of the stuff in front of the jury, which is kind of how I like it. I don't know if that will continue, but I don't have these moments of like total glory. And my favorite trial and moment in a trial I was a part of has nothing to do with me. But it was that first trial, that first tire defect case that we had. And our client I think she was Bhutanese. I'm not sure. I can't remember. We had like 16 clients, and some of them were from different places, but English was not her first language. She spoke a very small amount of English. She worked at a hotel in housekeeping, but I could communicate with her in breaks on stuff in very sort of slow English and simple English. And we would practice together on breaks. It was my first trial. She was there alone. Her husband, it was a wrongful death case for the loss of her husband. And so we kind of bonded during that trial as best that we could with this language barrier, because she spoke a pretty rare language. There were not many translators. And so the one that we had was basically working for the trial. So we couldn't really interact through the translator on breaks or anything. Anyway, so I was newer to the case. So other people had known her a little bit longer, but we had kind of taken the approach that a lot of our guests talk about, and that we've talked about, where we didn't do too much. We didn't want her testimony when it was her time to talk about her husband. We didn't want it to be too rehearsed. We didn't want it to be too sort of canned or whatever. But I didn't know if how emotional she would get. I don't think any of us really knew. I think a lot of times the people themselves don't really know till they get up there. But everything is going through this translator, and it's not one of those like, Spanish or French or where like you could pick up a word here or there. You have absolutely no idea what's been said until it's translated. And so I think just at the very, it was a very short direct of her. And she was asked a question about, just whether she missed her husband or something like that. And she says something, and she's very, calm and collected. And the translator, she's saying it in her language, and the translator translates it back. And so I don't even know how beautiful it was when she said it, but, she basically said, in my culture and my religion, we believe in reincarnation. And if I could be reincarnated, I would want to find my husband in the next life and marry him all over again. Was her answer to whether she missed him. Right. And like, it was not anything we had ever spoken about. We had never spoken to her about her religion really at all. It was completely just from her heart, totally natural and organic. And it was just like, I mean, of course, I'm trying not to cry because I'm like, I don't want the jury to think I'm trying to manipulate them or anything. But it was just, obviously it was a tragedy. So I can't be like, yes, because it's just sad. But it was just like, it's just a moment I'll never forget. It was my first trial, so it was already meaningful, but to have a client that just was such a lovely person and was able to express such a profound loss in such a beautiful way. It's just such a nice memory.
Yeah,
nice trial
I mean,
memory.
that is just fantastic and so meaningful. It's I mean, and you can't plan things like that. I mean, that's because it's just so profound, and what a way to express her love for her husband.
Yeah. So not to try to make everybody sad.
Right. Yeah.
But
wait, it's funny. You make me think of something else when you mentioned that you didn't want to cry in front of the jury. Is that this is another guest that we've had on the show is John Romano, great lawyer down in West Palm Beach, Florida. He did one of our first podcasts about his client who was attacked in a car dealership parking lot.
Yeah.
Well, I was just in something where his son, Todd Romano, was speaking, and he was talking about his dad, and was talking about how his dad gets very emotional in trial, and he breaks down in tears a lot. And he said that it's so well known down in that area that it's a standard motion in limine from the defense is to keep John Romano from crying in front of the jury. And I was like, I wonder how could you even try to enforce that? But it's so good.
It's also like telling someone not to cry is just like telling them not to laugh. Like you've just made it a guarantee that they're going to, because now it's that much harder not to. Like,
right.
Like if you can't laugh, that's when you need to laugh the most.
That's right.
Or when you're trying when you're trying really hard not to cry, like me, every time I go to the movies ever in public, that's the hardest time to not cry.
Oh,
you just gotta hope nobody sees you. But yeah, I wonder, like, I don't know what jurors think about that. Like, I think, I think if you've built a rapport with them, like John Romano obviously does, then, they know it's genuine.
Right.
But you do kind of, I think, especially for me, because a lot of times I am, second, third chair. And so I'm not doing a lot in front of the jury. I'm doing a lot with the judge. But I'm not doing a lot in front of the jury. And so I don't know what kind of read they have on me, and so I just am always thinking about just not seeming like I'm doing anything manipulative, not trying to draw any attention to myself, just trying to be invisible, even though they don't miss anything and they notice what I'm wearing and what shoes I'm wearing. And
right.
ask me questions about it afterwards.
And that happens to everybody.
Everyone.
Exactly.
But they're stuck. There's nothing else to look at. You're like I get it. I understand it. And it works to our advantage sometimes.
I'll never forget. And Jed, our law partner, tells this story much better than I do. But we were trying another case against Ford, and it was during voir dire, and I remember that the Ford lawyer was asking a question of a juror. And I can't remember if they about preconceived notions about lawyers or something to that effect. And this guy raised his hand and he said something about that he was in the clothing business and that he was looking at the Ford lawyer's shoes and he knew that he spent a lot of money on those shoes, and so he knew he was a high-priced lawyer kind of thing. And then he points over to Jed's shoes and he's like, and then I look at his shoes and I know he's not a high-priced lawyer. Oh, and we love our law partner Jed. I think even he would say he's not known for his great fashion sense.
No, certainly
but
not.
Great, fantastic lawyer.
Certainly not the footwear, but yeah,
yes.
amazing lawyer, has taught me so much.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, so we should say that for our listener questions, we will give shorter answers than these.
Yes. hopefully, or else we're gonna be on forever.
Maybe.
I do want to finish on kind of a fun question, and I should point out, Yvonne, that when you were at Rhodes College, you were an English Lit major. So I was going to ask you, do you have a favorite book or a favorite movie? It could be a legal movie or just a movie that you think everybody should watch, kind of thing. What would that be?
Oh man, that's a fun question, Steve. Shoot. Okay. So I would say, in terms of, especially when I was an English Lit student, I took a lot of classes that I do not remember what we read, especially I took a lot of English restoration literature classes that I'm like, read these weird old plays and stuff. But I was most into, at that time, I was most into probably Kurt Vonnegut was probably favorite author. Although I would say my favorite
Slaughterhouse-Five, or
yeah. I mean, I would say my favorite book though is actually probably Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger. I love that book. Easy read, quick read, and I love it. But I didn't really read a lot of that stuff for English Lit. A lot of my English Lit stuff was very sort of kind of, I guess, more scholarly and more about historical context stuff, and not really the stuff I'd read for fun.
Yeah.
I don't remember it that well. And then, movie wise, me, I just like geeky movies. So I don't know about that. What about you? What was your major?
I was an economics and a history major. So my favorite economist was, no, I'm just kidding.
Oh, God.
Yeah, exactly. Let me tell you the theory of
my favorite
supply and demand. That's what I loved reading back then.
God.
No, as far as books, sort of my favorite books, and it wasn't anything I don't think I was, I love traveling. Traveling is like one of my favorite things. So I always loved The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. And I tried to relive that when I was after college. My best friend and we backpacked around Europe. And so we went and ran with the Bulls in Pamplona and went to San Sebastian, went to, Paris, and we tried to do all that kind of stuff. And then On the Road by Jack Kerouac. That's also one of my favorites.
Right.
I was also wondering if you had a favorite legal movie. And I think there's one that we all sort of agree on, which I'll just say is My Cousin Vinny.
Yeah.
It's got so many great parts in it. And I think every lawyer has seen that movie. And if you haven't, you have to go out and watch it. I mean, it's
yes. So good. So good. I love it. I love, the is it The Rainmaker with Matt Damon and that's got the scenes with him and
the deposition scenes.
Yes, that is very relatable to a new lawyer.
Yep.
And then I would say this one's kind of borderline, but it is technically a legal movie, but Primal Fear with Richard Gere and Ed Norton.
Right. I don't want
to. There's a surprise
twist. Yeah. I remember that. I don't really remember much about the movie other than the twist, but yeah.
Well, no one can ruin that movie for you. It should be a crime for somebody to ruin that movie. What about you, other than My Cousin Vinny?
Yeah, My Cousin Vinny, I think, is my favorite. I really like A Few Good Men. I do think that some of those courtroom scenes are realistic. Now, some of it, maybe is a little overblown. You know, and then I like a civil action because I guess I like the idea of, you know, you're trying this case, you're doing well, and you're getting money put on the table, and you're like, no, we're going to roll the dice, and then you lose. I mean, it's just like,
Yeah.
you know, it's realistic in that way.
Yes.
And I mean, and it is based on a real case. So yeah, so those are some of my favorites. I also will say that what I always I like to point to this a lot, but one of the most classic slippery slope arguments that you can ever watch in media is Otter's speech in Animal House. He gives about how, you know, if you're, you know, we took a, you know, this isn't about whether or not we, you know, did things we should or shouldn't with a few women. We did. He's like, but if you're going to blame us, then you got to blame the entire fraternity system. And if you're going to blame the entire fraternity system, then you're blaming America. He's like, well, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to sit here while you badmouth the United States of America. You know, I just love that is a classic slippery slope argument right there. I mean,
it is. That's some reframing the issue right there.
That's right.
Masterful.
Exactly.
That's a good one. Those are fun questions, Steve.
Yeah. Well, we hope everybody sends in some questions. Let's remind everybody how they can send in questions to get answered by either us or our guests or Raz or one way is info@greattrialspodcast.com. You can send, that's the email, and then direct message through Instagram or Facebook, and we are at Great Trials Podcast, and send a direct message through that. So we look forward to receiving questions, and as always, if you want to rate, review, and subscribe, we always appreciate that. But that's it. Anything else, Yvonne?
No, Steve, you're a great podcast guest. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
You are the best podcast guest.
And Raz, thank you for making a special appearance.
Yes, anytime.
All right.